podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live in the Mappable USA studios here in Las Vegas. And today we have another show. We're going to dive more into blockchain. And to do that, let's start off by bringing in Vicky Hutchmala from the World Token Market and the QOQ Marketplace. Vicky, how's it going today?
I'm so good today, Ron. The day is beautiful, the weather is beautiful, the sun is shining, and we have got a guest with us this morning that's going to broaden our knowledge about blockchain, tell us different aspects, and hopefully our listeners will learn quite a bit from him. I'm excited.
Yes, so am I. So let's waste no more time here. Let's get on to Chris Brodersen. He's the blockchain lab lead for Deloitte. Chris, how you doing today?
Hey, Ron, how are you? I'm great. Never had a bad day.
Yeah, I hear you. Exactly. There's always something going on in blockchain, and you're out in beautiful New York, my old hometown right there, in New Jersey or whatever. It's great to be on the East Coast sometimes, right?
Yeah, well, not today. It's a little cold, but yes, love New York.
Yeah. So Chris, you've been involved in blockchain for a while now. Let's start off the show by maybe telling the audience your background and what you've been doing and how you got to the point where you got interested in blockchain to begin with.
Sure. So prior to the work that I've been doing in the space, I was involved in financial services. Specifically, I was in the capital markets sell-side business. So think of trading stocks and bonds and doing IPOs and those sorts of things. And of course, financial services was one of the early industries to look at this technology and understand what it can do because of the early rise of cryptocurrencies. And at that time, about 5 years ago, I was asked to take a look at it by one of my colleagues because really nobody was doing much in the space, at least among the big consulting firms. And boy, I was hooked. I mean, I started reading not about the cryptos, but more about the underlying technology and thought, wow, man, this is just going to change so many things across so many industries. And I very quickly just made it my full-time job.
Well, yeah, I had something very similar because when I was looking at the crypto, obviously, Bitcoin came up and everybody's talking about Bitcoin, and I was never really hooked on the Bitcoin part of it, but I saw the technology behind it, and like as you said, I think that's the technology that's really, really interesting. There's so many applications for it that like we said before the podcast, we went to this conference last week in Las Vegas, and oh my God, so what an eye opener it is! Blockchain is going to really change the world. There's no question about it.
Well, I always like to say it's one of the things that's going to change the world, right? So, we think about the Internet as another manifestation of the Industrial Revolution sometimes, right? That analogy is made. And the thing that I say about that is that, back in the Industrial Revolution, we had to build railroads and waterways and, all this infrastructure. And now we fast forward to today, and I think of blockchain as one of those rails or waterways, or what is it? Because really, in my mind, the blockchain technology has a lot of benefits, but it's what you build on top of those blockchains that really is the power that we're going to harness in the next several years.
Oh, yes, and I really believe that blockchain and all its applications are fundamentally going to change the world in many aspects across various industries and just daily life. As much as the Internet changed everybody's life, blockchain is going to change everybody's life. But people are afraid of it. Everything that's new, everything that comes along that's different and a little bit outside of the comfort zone is a scary thing. What would you say, why do you think people are so afraid of it?
I don't know that people are afraid of it as much as they just don't fundamentally understand it. So, my mom often asks me, please explain to me what you do. I mean, I keep trying to explain it to her. And finally, I just got to the point where I said, Mom, you know what? Someday you're going to do something that's better, stronger, faster on the Internet. You're not going to know why. You're not going to care. It's not going to matter to you. Chances are, though, that there could be a blockchain, or what I like to call a blockchain-inspired technology running in the background that's making that thing happen. So I don't think people are as afraid as they are feeling like, okay, is this going to disrupt me?
And just apprehensive because it's new and will change things.
Well, it will change some things, but it will lead to new things, right? I mean,
right.
Again, people always look at the internet. They draw that parallel, and we think of all of the different things that have changed over time. For example, e-commerce, right? Think about the way we buy things today, vastly different than, call it, 1990. Now, there were some folks that were severely disrupted, yet there were other businesses that rose, like Amazon. So for every disruption, there's a potential opportunity on the other side. At least that's the way I like to think about it.
That's true. That's really true. So what do you think would be or do you even know or have an opinion of what industry might get the most advantage from blockchain at this point in its evolution?
Well, I think every industry is going to have some advantage. I can't really say, or I don't think anybody can really say right now who has the advantage. But Deloitte does an annual blockchain survey, and we're starting the next one for 2020 now. But if you look at our most recent survey that was published in May of 2019, what you see are some really interesting trends. For example, when we ask people about implementation, what's the barriers to entry here? And one of them is it implementation? That went down precipitously. The regulatory issues that so many people cited the year before, that went from 39% to 30%. Worries about security threats, those went down. But what I really found interesting was within this specific set of data was that the concerns over sensitivity of competitive information actually went up. And that, to me, is an initial sign of maturity. Why? Because it means that enterprises are taking a really hard look at what is this thing and how does it actually work. And so they're starting to realize that blockchain, in its essence, is really a shared data construct. So how do we share information in a secure way without giving up our competitive advantage or our place in the market? So, but when we deep dive into kind of what's happening by industry, the industries that seem to be furthest out in front right now are TMT, tech, media, telecom, which makes sense, right? When you think about it, you've got all of the big players out there that are standing up blockchain as a service. And so when we look at the amount of investment, the TMT space is far out in front in terms of investing $5 million or more. And then that's followed by energy and resources, manufacturing, life sciences and healthcare. I mean, all of these industries, it's not just financial services, all of these industries are looking at how blockchain is going to impact them.
Well, when you say that you are the lab lead, the blockchain lab lead at Deloitte, what exactly does that mean?
So Deloitte has a blockchain lab. Actually, we have 3 of them globally, one in New York, one in Dublin, one in Hong Kong. All of our competitors have similar types of setups, as well as many of the large companies. So within Deloitte, our lab actually supports all of our functions, and what that means is consulting, advisory, tax, and audit. And then within those offerings, we cover all of the industries. So if you have a blockchain project or client, they come to us and we help them with everything from education to use case ideation and validation, proof of concept, and production environments. At the same time, right now there are a lot of interesting applications out there. So our lab also looks at the ecosystem players and decides, which of these technologies make sense for us to bring to our clients.
The blockchain lab then is more of an analytical type of thing then?
No, we're both analytical and functional. And what I mean by functional is we do the actual client delivery. So again, if we have numerous examples of clients who have come to us and said, help us understand how and where we should apply this technology. And we, as I said, we do everything from taking them from education to production environment, basically bringing them on the blockchain journey.
So you're able to create a blockchain for one of your clients who come to you and say, or if they want to issue tokens for fundraising, that's something that Deloitte can do, that you do in your lab or as part of it?
We don't do the actual tokens and fundraising. We do advise a number of clients who are looking at tokens. Now, the interesting thing about tokens is the first piece of that is you have to, as we say, define what's the thing. What is that token? Is it a security token? Is it a utility token? What is it being used for? And the reason that that's important is because it has a whole array of impacts, especially from a regulatory and tax perspective. So let me give you an example. The IRS considers cryptocurrency an asset, an asset, right? And so when you start to move things using tokens, there is the potential that the IRS may consider that a barter transaction, and that's going to have an impact on your tax reporting and your tax rates. So tokens are a whole different thing. Mostly what the lab does, though, is we help enterprises stand up permissioned environments. So when we start to think about things like track and trace in the manufacturing sector, or trying to bring some ecosystem players together to create a consortium, those sorts of things.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so then you get involved in smart tokens or smart contracts as well?
That could be part of the solution. That's a design decision that has to be made. Do we need a smart contract? And then what is the smart contract for? So again, you don't necessarily have to have one, but you may want to use one to automate some sort of process that today is very, labor intensive or latent.
So a lot of what you do is along the lines of education and advice so that your clients can better understand how blockchain can be utilized in their industry or their business, or even if it should be. Not every company needs or should use blockchain, but then, there's other companies that it's a perfect fit.
Right. Well, we do the production builds, and we have numerous examples. But yes, on the front end, we do exactly what you described. But as I like to say, at least 80% of the use case ideas that people bring into the lab, we look at and say, that's an interesting idea, and you could use a blockchain, but why would you? There are other technologies that are better, stronger, faster, and you don't really need a blockchain. We have to look at what makes a blockchain unique. So we start with, what's the problem? And then, is this a shared problem? Blockchain is not a one-to-many solution. Blockchain is a many-to-many solution. So if we can identify that shared problem among a group of actors or participants, then we start to look at, other factors like, where do we have situations where there's shared data? Where do we have multiple writers to that data? Where do we have transaction dependencies? Where do we have an absence of trust? And that trust can be complete mistrust. I don't know you, you don't know me, as we have in the cryptocurrency world, or that trust could be ecosystem players that have been doing business for years, but because of their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders or whoever, they have to, the Russian proverb, trust but verify, that
Correct.
Reconciliation engine, right? So these are just some of the things that we start to look at and say, okay, if we can get past some of those questions, then maybe a blockchain could be a solution.
Yeah, and Chris, you mentioned that you had 3 locations for the labs now. Are these collaborative locations? You guys work together, or is everything a standalone?
No, absolutely. It's very, as I mentioned, cross-functional, but we're also very global. Within Deloitte, we call it Green Dot. So we are very, very closely aligned with our colleagues in those other locations. And then we have other centers of excellence in certain countries, Canada, Switzerland, Germany, the UK, the list goes on.
Yeah, that's why it's good to align yourself with a global company like Deloitte, who has the resources and experience to move forward with a lot of these these projects. So I'm wondering if I'm going to start a project and I'm going to meet with the lab. Take us through the process. Do we sit down with a blank sheet of paper and go over all the requirements, or do I come in with an idea? Or do you guys kind of like nurture that and talk about what could possibly be done? But it basically starts from a blank sheet of paper with these guys, right?
Sometimes they come in and they say, we just want to understand how this could potentially impact my business. Is this going to be disruptive? Are there opportunities? Other times we have clients that come in and they say, hey, we've identified this use case that we think makes a lot of sense, and we want you to help us think through that. So, for example, I had a call this week with a client who wants to create what is essentially a loyalty token. And so we spent a lot of time talking about, A, does it make sense? And then B, what are all the considerations that you have around that? What are the security concerns? What is that token going to be? As I mentioned before, what is that going to do from a reporting or a tax perspective? You know, the thing about blockchain that I always say is that building the widget is easy. The technology part of it is actually relatively easy. It's the business model transformation that's the hard part, because there are so many different things that you have to consider. And that's why I think there's been some early blockchain fatigue, because there were a number of solutions created out there in the marketplace. But as we talked about prior to the call, you know, these were really hammers looking for nails. The whole business impact had not been thought through until now.
Correct.
Right, and
Correct.
and I think that goes to the basic foundation, regardless of your industry or company, is you need to identify, but then you need to create a governance model so that you're able to adapt when something comes up, and you've already spelled it out and you've already set it up, so you don't have to do any creating the wheel along the process.
Well, yeah, so that's another thing that the lab does is we help our clients understand how to build that ecosystem or how to build that platform, or is it a consortium? Because when you start moving into what we call this co-opetition type of environment, where you have competitors or ecosystem players coming together and doing something in a shared environment, how do we make that work? I mean, how do we onboard and offboard participants, and who's going to allow that to happen? What do we do about dispute resolution? Who owns the IP? Who's going to fund the thing? I mean, the list just goes on, and there are different types of consortia or ecosystems that are developing out there. But again, that's another thing that we have to help clients kind of think through. You can't just stand up a blockchain and say, here I am, we're open for business.
Right, and this is fundamental, because if you don't anticipate the problems or what may come up along the way as you're building this blockchain for your clients, then you have a built-in problem that is going to create not only hardship to the industry, but an expenditure of a lot of money trying to fix something that you should have thought of before you even started. And that's
right.
where you need help and advice and education to understand what you're really getting into. The concept is a simple thing to understand, but actually making it a reality involves a lot more detail than people, I think, realize in the beginning.
Right. Yep, you're absolutely right. But again, this is all just part of the maturation process, right?
Right.
I mean, it's really interesting to see how the attitudes have been changing over the past couple of years. I mean, in our last survey, besides the investment numbers, and now by the way, this survey is a global survey. The people that we interview are largely C-suite, so CIO, CTO, CEO, et cetera. And in 2019, 53% of them indicated that blockchain has become a critical priority for them. And
right.
That's up 10% from the year prior, right? And by the way, that kind of jives with a recent number that Gartner put out there. And then 83% of these people see a compelling use case for blockchain, and that was also up about 10% from the prior year. At the same time, though, while these attitudes are improving and we're talking about implementation and things like that, we're also seeing some dissonance in the market. And what I mean by that is that some people are still saying that it's overhyped, or that a small percentage said they're actually going to scale back their blockchain investment. And that diversity of thought, at least in my mind, shows some maturation because it reflects the seriousness in considering the technology's possibilities and limitations.
Right, because it's not necessarily good for everybody. It's not necessarily a good fit. But if it is, then you need to start to think about how to implement it into the future. And, like every brand new thing, sometimes, the first phone or the first computer was great, but the third, fourth, fifth version down the road was even better. And sometimes you wait until later before you start investing into something brand new. Work the bugs out.
Yeah, I think there is some of that. We do have some, folks that are kind of on the sidelines waiting to see what's going to happen in their industry. And it really depends on the industry that we're talking about. Again, some are a little further ahead than others. I think that's fair. And I think part of that is driven largely by the understanding that, do we have an understanding of not only the business impact, but, for example, within financial services, what is the regulatory impact? And it's been really interesting over the last year or two to see how the regulatory regimes out there around the world have really started to engage, especially in places like Hong Kong and Singapore.
Oh yeah, and now it's going in. We talked to a couple gentlemen actually when we went to the conference last week on blockchain about how now people are starting to use it in apply it for voting. Voting at a political level, but just in-house voting on shares, on shareholders, on HOAs, even down to the level of HOAs, and doing voting for boards and officers. So, it's a developing concept where it was created for this, but now it's exponential into how you can use it. And if you have the idea and you have someone like Deloitte, like yourself, who can figure out the application, it can go anywhere and do anything.
Well, again, it can. The question is, do you want it to?
And that's exactly it. Do you want it to, or do you need it to? And can you afford to do it? But then, even if you've answered all of those questions, do you have and can you afford to have the employees that you need to help you to implement it? Do you have the tech people that can implement it, that can run it, that can oversee it, that can even understand it? And can you afford to bring those people on? And if you can, where do you get them from?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Deloitte.
That was kind of a long question. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's really interesting. So we and our competitors, we're all involved at some level with trying to grow that talent pool, and that involves everything from internal education and training to working with a number of universities to help them stand up blockchain-based curriculum. And that's been a really interesting journey for me personally, because it's allowed me to go to many universities and spend time with the professors and their students and see what's their perception. And so a lot of these students are looking at this saying, this is an opportunity, because when you look at what's happening from a talent perspective, and we ask that question, I mean, the currently hiring blockchain talent in TMT, 56% of our respondents said that they're actively hiring, and they plan to hire more within the next year. That was 24%. Same thing for financial services. I mean, the total number in terms of hiring and planning to hire is over 80%. So, wow. Yeah, it really is a growing field. But remember, this is all part of the fact that we're past what I call the blockchain tourism phase. We've now moved into the phase of not does it work or can it work, but where should it and where will it work in my business?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because just by the mere reason that it's now more people know about it, more people understand it, and now more people understand it enough to be able to think about how to apply it.
Well, and to think about where not to apply it. That's just as important.
And exactly, because they're equal parts of the same question. Can I use it or not use it? Can I afford it, or is it actually going to benefit me in relative to the cost of implementing it or not? It's like both sides of the coin need to be answered.
Right, exactly. And it's not just implementation. The other thing that we help our clients understand is what I call the day two problem. So we've built this thing, we made it run, it works, we've launched our blockchain solution, and now how do we make sure that it keeps running and running effectively, and that we haven't created a cascade of events that's actually going to be negative.
Precisely.
Right. Yep, and these are all the things that we have to think about. And so, again, it's not as simple as you think, and not because of the technology, as I mentioned earlier, but rather, what is this actually going to do to my business?
Right. And Chris, one more question about blockchain in terms of crowdfunding. A lot of companies are looking towards blockchain on raising money, and they're all talking about this whole liquidity factor as a big benefit of blockchain. Do people come to you and understand that point about liquidity, or do you have to kind of let them know about that, or what's their view on that? Are they looking at that as an important item?
So are you looking at it through the lens of trying to take an asset, tokenize it, and that is going to create liquidity, or are you looking at it more?
Such as a real estate project, for example.
Sure. So the answer is the consulting answer, which is it depends. So what are we tokenizing? and why? Why do we want to tokenize this thing? So you gave the example of real estate. If we can take a large asset like a building and tokenize it into smaller pieces, will that improve the liquidity because it allows for a broader set of investors? Now, there's certain questions around that in terms of where can we offer these tokens? Do they have to be QIBs? Is it a Reg A filing? All sorts of questions that we have to help people understand there. But on the flip side, we've had plenty of people come to us and say, hey, we have this relatively illiquid asset and we want to tokenize it. Well, just because you tokenize it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to improve the liquidity. You have to understand what is the source of that friction. Why is it illiquid? Mm-hmm. So private equity is a great example, right? In today's world, or in the previous world, I should say, if you or I owned a piece of a company in a private equity transaction and I decided to sell it, well, there's no secondary market, right? We have to go out and you have to find the counterparty. You have to negotiate the terms. This is all, very latent, heavy stuff. Well, NASDAQ built their platform a couple of years ago to prove out the technology that, we can tokenize these private equity shares, and now moving them becomes much faster and much easier. And by the way, much more traceable, and it helps the underlying companies improve the tracking of their cap tables. So again, we always go back to what is it that you're trying to solve? And then does a blockchain solution or a blockchain-inspired solution make sense? Because remember, that's the other piece that you need to think about is there are a whole host of things that make a blockchain unique where we say, that unique piece might be valuable to me without needing a blockchain.
Yeah, that's a great take. A really interesting aspect of that. Amazing stuff. Chris, this has been great. If someone is listening to this podcast right now and wants to get involved with one of your blockchain labs or has questions or whatever, wants to contact you, what's the best way that they can reach you at?
They can find me on a number of different places like LinkedIn, or they can look to some of our eminence that has my email address. But it's c@deloitte.com.
Yeah, and then we'll link all that stuff in the show notes too, so you can just click it from there. Everything that we talked about, we'll kind of go over. If you're listening to this on the archive, you just click on the link there, and you'll go right to Chris's LinkedIn profile. But before we go, Vicki, do you have any last questions for Chris here?
Well, after this podcast, Chris, I would say that everything is relative. And if you want to change what you're doing and come into the future, don't do it until you've actually had an in-depth conversation with someone like yourself who knows what they're doing, who knows how to take someone by the hand and lead them into the future. I think that's one of the most important things that you and your lab is doing at Deloitte, and I salute you for it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's been an incredible journey.
And a fun one, I'm sure.
It is. It is fun. But, the thing I told Tracy this story, my wife has a master's in computer science. And 5 years ago when I came home and, started talking about this, she looked at me and said, "Who are you?" And, yeah. And so it's a long-winded way of saying that, we're going to see, dramatic change in a whole host of things going forward. And the way I like to say it is, you know what, guys? The genie's out of the bottle. Companies and ecosystems are saying to themselves, you know what, we've done this way for 40, 50 years, and now they're starting to say, wait a second, with the technology we have today, why? Is there a better way? And again, it doesn't necessarily have to have or be a blockchain, but it could be something that is, as I said, blockchain inspired. And that's really kind of the interesting thing, is that there's so much more to happen. And then the other thing that I always find fascinating is that, again, the real value of the blockchain is not the blockchain itself, it's what we build on top of it. And what's the intersection of things like blockchain and IoT, or blockchain and artificial intelligence? How are we going to use a blockchain to make those things better, faster, stronger?
Absolutely, absolutely correct. And that's what's so fascinating about blockchain. As the human spirit evolves and becomes better and becomes smarter, then we have to bring all of this with us. We can't be getting from here to there in a horse and buggy while we have a computer creating blockchain. Everything has to come along together at the same level in order to really help us and help your mother to understand what you're doing.
So the parting thing that I would say to your audience is this: we can all see the art of the possible, but we're not going to get from zero to there, just as we didn't have that happen in e-commerce. So as we like to say at Deloitte, is think big, think really big, but start small, and then iterate often. And
exactly.
That's what's going to make the journey work. But if we say to ourselves, oh, tomorrow we're going to have a fully blockchain functioning payment system, we'll spin our wheels for a very long time.
That's right.
Agreed.
And what you'll end up with is a big bowl of chaos.
Yeah. Well, Chris, you got me inspired here. I'm psyched. The last half hour has been great. I want to thank you again for taking the time out to be with us and talk to our audience. It's been amazing, and I thank you for the information. And Vicki, thanks for co-hosting the podcast. And everybody out there, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at mappableusa.com. If you just go to that website, you'll scroll down, you'll see all our syndication sources, and you pick the one you like best so you never miss another podcast. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for your support. And we'll be at you next week with another Mappable USA podcast where we put you on the map. Have a great week, everyone.